Oh, hey, Gonzalez, what are you doing with my projector? Oh, I'm just trying to play some video games for a bit. I figured since we got autopilot working again, I had some free time. I see you got some Tetris there. Yep, just trying to beat my high score. Funny story about Tetris. Did you see the new movie trailer? They're making a movie? That sounds silly. How do you make a story about falling blocks? Oh, it isn't about the game. It's about how it got made. Ooh, that sounds interesting. How'd it look? Pretty good. A bit Hollywood romanticized, though. Oh, really? Oh. You're gonna make another video, aren't you? You read my mind. Hey everyone, Koopaman here. Pieces made of 4 squares shaped into L's, S's, T's, squares, and lines. Descending pieces at random from up above, you must arrange them into orderly lines with your only information is the next immediate piece. And if you want to score big, you must get a 4-line clear. That is Tetris. Today, this is considered a cornerstone of puzzle video games. It's on game consoles, arcade cabinets, phones, computers, even calculators. You wouldn't think that such a common, simple game would be worth making such a fuss over, right? Wrong! You see, this simple game has a very, very deep story behind it and a very rich history as well. The movie premiering today, Tetris, shall be a biopic drama based on that story. But as you know with Hollywood movies, when you see the tagline based on a true story, you know at least 60% of it is made up. Not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily. The trailer got me excited, and I rarely get excited for movies these days. No, dear viewer, today I shall recount you the true story that this movie is based on. So if you choose to see it, you know what they kept and what's pure fiction. And believe me, it's a wild tale. In order to understand what I'm about to tell you, you gotta understand the setting of this real-life drama and where it took place, in the Soviet Union. To keep things brief, here's a cute little song that I'm also working in another video, explaining the further detail of this period in Russian history. The short version is imagine George Orwell's 1984 come to life, and that's the reality of the USSR during when Tetris was made. Link in the description, and please stay tuned for that video.
I am the man who arranges the blocks that continue to fall from up above. Come Muscovite, let the workers unite, a collective regime of peace and love. I work so hard in arranging the blocks, but the landlord and taxman bleed me dry. But the workers will rise, we will not compromise, for we know that the old regime must die. Long live Lenin, kill the Tsar. We salute the sickle and saw. I am the man who arranges the blocks that continue to fall from up above. The food on your plate now belongs to the state, a collective regime of peace and love. I have no choice in arranging the blocks. I'm the Bolshevik rule, what they say goes. The rule of the game is we all are the same, and my blocks must create unbroken rows. Long live Stalin, he loves you. Sing these words or you know what he'll do. I am the man who arranges the blocks that are made by the men in Kazakhstan. They come 2 weeks late and they don't tessellate, but we're working to Stalin's 5-year plan. I am the man who arranges the tanks that will make all the Nazis keep away. The Fuhrer is dead and Europe is red. Let us point all our guns at the USA. We shall live forevermore. We can start a nuclear war. I am the man who arranges the blocks that are building a highly secret base. Hip hip hurrah for the USSR, we are sending our men to outer space. I work so hard in arranging the blocks, but each night I go home to my wife in tears. What's the point of it all when you're building a wall and in front of your eyes it disappears? Pointless work for pointless pay. This is one game I shall not play. I am the man who arranges the blocks.
The story begins with a man named Alexei Pajidnov. Born to a pair of movie critics, Alexei lived in Moscow, and though his parents divorced when he was very young, leaving him to live with a single mother in a state-owned slum, his gift for mathematics and puzzle solving made it very clear that he had an exceptional mind. This was easily recognized by his state, who allowed him to study mathematics at the Moscow Aviation Institute and later intern at the Soviet Academy of Sciences. The Kremlin had intended him to become a major asset for their weapons program that would grant them the edge over the Americans and finally win the Cold War. It was during this time that the Soviets had invaded Afghanistan with the intent to add it to their worldwide revolution and suppress the religious element. It was in 1979, and Alexei would accept a job at the Academy's Computer Science Center, where he would put his unique and exceptional brain to work in ways that the Soviets could win the war and spread the revolution. This, however, was not what Alexei had wanted. Alexei had a very different dream in mind, one that didn't involve guns and violence. His dream was about singing and dancing and making people happy. Alexei had no interest in the war, the state, or really anything the party wanted him to do for them. He was employed to test out their software systems, but instead he used them to create games and puzzles for people to enjoy using the university's Electronica 60 computer system, a cutting-edge new system that was a rarity even for the high members of the elites at the time. To quote the man himself, "Games allow people to get to know each other better, and act as revealers of things you might not normally notice, such as their ways of thinking." Truly, the man was a pure and innocent soul, born into a system of evil. Needless to say, his higher-ups were displeased by this, but against all odds, they allowed it. It would be in 1984 when Alexei was trying to recreate his favorite childhood puzzle game when the idea struck him for blocks to fall from above and be organized into orderly rows. He got to work, making it and calling it Tetris, a portmanteau of tetra, meaning four, and tennis, his favorite sport, which the game did not even remotely resemble, but the name Tetris sounded cool, so why the hell not? The result was Alexei's most popular and addictive creation ever. It quickly spread through the Soviet computer systems to the point that every university and hospital with a computer had a copy of it on their systems. It was so addicting, in fact, it had to be banned from the Moscow Medical Institute as it would interfere with productivity. Even a few higher-ups in the party noticed this affecting their agendas, but they didn't want to act because they too were interested and addicted to this game. Alexei knew he had a hit on his hands, but before he could think about it even further, the first thing he needed to do was port it to a more advanced computer system, such as the IBM, which would allow him to add things like colors, levels, and a scoring system. He got to work with a friend, Vadim Gorizmanov, and they both adapted the game to the IBM system in less than 3 weeks. Now he had the game the way he wanted it. The only thing to do now was to package it, sell it, and have the whole world play it. There was just one teensy tiny little problem. He lived in the Soviet Union. Using party technology to create a pointless puzzle game that not only does not increase productivity but actively hinders it is one thing, but if the party knew he wanted to enter the capitalist market, he would have been sent to the gulags faster than you can say.
Слово «рум» из смерть для вас означает одно и то же.
Of course, this was also Russia, which means it's not about the system being corrupt and evil, it's about using said corrupt evil system to your own benefit and knowing how to play the game. Alexei gave his superior, a man by the name of Viktor Brozhevin, the rights to the source code in the name of the Academy in exchange for an under-the-table kickback, which allowed him to sell the game to a publisher in the satellite state of Hungary, known as Novatrade, who then published and distributed the game via floppy disk, spreading it all over the satellite states as far as Poland. From here, it'd be found by Robert Stein, a software hawker from London, who brought it back home and showed it to his bosses. They loved it so much they wanted him to get it published published in the West, so they called the Academy, who gave them a very lukewarm agreement, but because of how fax agreements work, it was as good as a legally binding contract, and they were on their way. Stein began approaching companies to court to publish Tetris in the West. Just one tiny problem. The game was made in the Soviet Union. Nobody wanted to touch that bad juju. The only takers were Spectrum Holobyte and Microsoft, who essentially only port the game to PC and call it a day. They didn't even mention the game's creator Alexei or the fact that it was made in the USSR out of fear that it wouldn't sell. And like that, it seemed like the dream was dead. That was until Spectrum Holobyte sold the rights to a few of its games to a small team known as Bulletproof Software for the sake of publishing them in the Asian market, where it would be found by Hank Rogers. Now, Hank is an interesting fellow. Born in the Netherlands, Hank became the founder of a company called Bulletproof, which was based out of Hawaii, and used his unique European-American living in Hawaii background to serve as a sort of international bridge between the Western and Asian markets. It was under him and his company Japan got one of the first RPG games ever made, Black Onyx, which is one of the inspirations for the JRPG genre. Hank was looking for a new hotness like Black Onyx to sell to Japanese publishers when, lo and behold, he had just picked up this one game among all the others and started playing it. He was hooked, and he wanted to make this game and its creator household names by any means necessary. Here's where things get a little confusing. Due to how the USSR handled copyright and how it got passed around through publishers, multiple companies believed they had the sole exclusive publishing rights to Tetris, leading to two different versions of Tetris coming to the Famicom in Japan. One version was done by Tengen, a subsidiary of Atari who had gotten the rights from Sega after Microsoft sold the rights to them, and the other was done by one of Nintendo's in-house teams. Obviously, the both of them couldn't own the sole publishing rights at the same time, and it went to court. But before going into that, Hank Rogers was on a mission by Nintendo to ensure that the true rights to the game were secured for their newest console, the Game Boy. His first stop was Robert Stein, the man who had been trying to get it published in the West in the first place. He informed them that he was out to obtain the exclusive rights for Nintendo to publish Tetris, and it seemed like he was willing to play ball, agreeing to sign the contract. The issue was that Tetris didn't belong to him either, so he needed the approval of the USSR. Days passed and he got no reply. Hank assumed something was up, so he booked a ticket to Moscow the next day. He arrived at the office of Soviet Electronics and Technology, called Elorg, and wouldn't you know it, his suspicions were right. Stein was there with an appointment the exact same day to secure the rights for Microsoft. He had betrayed Hank and aimed to screw him and Nintendo over for good. Hank Rogers entered the building without an appointment and interrupted the meeting, telling the official, Nikolai Belikov, that Microsoft no longer held the rights and were unethically in breach of contract, while Stein accused Hank and Nintendo of illegally publishing the game and requested him to be escorted out. Normally, in a bureaucratic hellhole like the USSR, the validity of your argument does not matter if you did not follow the procedure. By the grace of God, however, Belikov decided to think it over for a bit, as this was an argument between three companies, all seemingly with legitimate rights, those being Atari, Microsoft, and Nintendo. It was during this time where Hank did the one thing that all the others didn't. He went to meet the actual creator himself, Alexei Pajitnov, and the two formed a fast friendship. With the actual creator in his corner, there was not much stopping Hank for the claim of legitimacy for his deal. Belikov then ruled in favor of Nintendo and Rogers, and had Stein sign away his claims to the console publishing rights using some legal jargon to get him to sign as a smokescreen. While this was going on in the United States, it was ruled in favor of Nintendo over Atari of the NES Tetris Wars, and Tengen was ordered a cease and desist and to destroy all copies of their version of Tetris, which caused the game to become a rarity sought out by collectors to this day. Of course, once Robert Stein knew what he'd signed, he was pissed. And he had people threaten Belikov, and even wrote letters to President Mikhail Gorbachev about it, basically acting like a complete Karen, and he was rightfully ignored. Hell, according to urban legends, he tried to say that the deal was anti-revolutionary as a means of getting Belikov sent to the gulags, only to be ignored by Gorbachev himself, who was an anti-revolutionary liberal trying to bring Pizza Hut to Russia. But that was that, and the deal was done, and Nintendo held the rights for Tetris. Sega did at least keep the arcade rights, but had to cancel their console port, which became another collectible rarity until they released it on the Genesis Mini TV console many years later. As for Hank Rogers and Alexei Pajitnov, they would a few years later meet after the fall of the USSR, and Alexei would move to the United States and help form the Tetris company, where Alexei would finally collect his well-deserved royalties. He would also continue to make puzzle games such as Weltris, Hatris, and help Nintendo with their puzzle games such as Yoshi's Cookie. Pretty interesting stuff for a simple falling block game made by the Russians. Hopefully the movie ends up being good too. Sure, the trailer looks very good, but it looks very Hollywoodified. But hey, what are you gonna do? It's the core of the story that matters, and at its core, it's a very interesting tale. Should be fun. Anyway, this has been the Koopa Man. Game on.